Good afternoon, this is Greg Krasovsky. I'm an attorney with an office in Washington, D.C. I'm also a former police officer, and today I wanted to talk to you about constitutional, civil, and consumer rights, especially in light of what happened at a Starbucks in Philadelphia. As many of you know, let's start with that episode. A number of days ago, a couple of African-American men were sitting at a Starbucks in Philadelphia. They got 18th and Spruce. I grew up in Philadelphia. That's why I worked as a police officer. That's why I started getting my legal education. So I'm familiar with Philadelphia. It's my hometown. Anyway, these two gentlemen had come into Starbucks, sat down, didn't order anything. Apparently they were waiting for someone, either for a friend or a real estate agent. One of them went to use the bathroom, at which point the Starbucks manager or an employee asked them to leave because they were non-paying customers. Apparently there was something in their demeanor or in their appearance that alarmed the Starbucks employees or management. 18th and Spruce, this is the Rittenhouse Square neighborhood of Philadelphia, one of the most exclusive areas of the city, downtown center of Philadelphia. To me, at least the video footage that I saw in the photos, these gentlemen didn't look like vagrants or criminals, looked like ordinary young African-American men dressed casually. They refused to leave. That was their right. They expressed their position. They felt they were being unfairly singled out. And at which point, Starbucks employees or management summoned the Philadelphia Police Department. A number of police officers arrived, including from the bicycle unit with bicycle helmets. I think there was about 6 police officers. They asked the gentleman to leave. They refused as well. Apparently they felt that the police were trying to enforce an unlawful order, something that violated their civil rights as African Americans for being singled out. And as a result, the police took them out in handcuffs, transported them to the local police district. Apparently the police felt there was probable cause to arrest them for either trespassing or disorderly conduct, the Pennsylvania Crimes Code and the Philadelphia Municipal Code. But that wasn't made, thank God. Charges were not pressed. Apparently there were some consultations with the on-duty district attorney. And from what I understand from the press, the on-duty district attorney said that he didn't see any probable cause to warrant an arrest or prosecution for either trespassing or disorderly conduct. In other words, these men just simply expressed their civil position. This has raised a storm. I've made some comments on this. Interesting responses on Facebook from people. But let's look at what's really going on. I'm an African-American man. My father's from Africa. I've had the occasion of being singled out, either because people perceive me as an African-American or they think I'm Hispanic or even from the Middle East. So, you get the whole complex minority treatment. Sometimes people look at you suspiciously because they think you're, Middle Eastern or Arabic, or they look at you suspiciously because they think you're from South America or Central America. But anyway, regardless, that's unacceptable today. I want all of you to understand what it's like to be a member of a minority group, regardless of whether you're African American or Asian or Hispanic or another ethnic group that's visible, and you get singled out. People start looking at you with suspicion, with lack of trust, when it's not even warranted. I'm sure many people will identify the fact when you're walking down the street and a woman is coming towards you and she instantly starts grabbing or checking her purse because she looks at you and she's thinking, man, maybe this guy's going to mug me and steal my purse. Needless to say that that doesn't feel good, but you get used to it. What you don't want to get used to is, imagine if you're at any sort of public establishment, whether it's a store, a restaurant, a fast food place, or a cafe, and you start being singled out. I'm sure a number of minority men and women have had the experience of being overly watched by store security because you get suspected that you're going to be a shoplifter. That doesn't feel good either. Or you start getting the extra special treatment when you exit a store, and people, are overly thorough when it comes to checking your receipts and the merchandise that you've purchased and things like that. Imagine if you're getting the same type of treatment in a restaurant or in a cafe, especially if you're with friends or on a date or with your wife or your children. That doesn't feel good. So I think today, we've had 50 years pass. We just had the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's death, his assassination. And I'm hoping that in 2018, everyone should know better, that if you're the proprietor, the employer, or a manager of any establishment, you're not going to violate the civil rights, constitutional rights, or consumer rights of people who patronize your establishment. Just because you may have some issues with their race, their ethnicity, the language that they speak, their perceived socioeconomic status, or anything like that. We have to move beyond this. But speaking as a lawyer, here's what I want you to think about. If you or anyone else that you know suspects they've been a victim of discriminatory treatment, either as a consumer or just as a regular citizen, then I would definitely suggest seeking the advice of a competent and experienced attorney, regardless whether you're going to call my law office or you're going to call someone else. But definitely call a lawyer, talk to an attorney, see whether there can be any sort of way to address your grievances within our current legal system and the laws that we have in the books. Because you don't want to have people get away with it, and you don't deserve it either, to be insulted this way, especially in front of your acquaintances, friends, loved ones. And that's very important. Regarding specific examples of violation of consumer rights, where there is some discrimination present, we've already read about, probably all of you have read about examples where banks, mortgage companies have been accused of discriminatory treatment of African Americans or Hispanics when it comes to applications for mortgages, for car loans, for other types of consumer credit. Again, unacceptable in 2018. If you feel that you have been improperly denied either a mortgage, car loan, any other type of consumer loan, or other types of services, please seek the advice of an attorney. Let's see what your options are. Let's see whether we can address your grievance, and if warranted, demand compensation for you, or in the very least to make sure that whatever you were denied, hopefully you'll receive, if standards are being applied fairly, evenly across the board to everyone. And there is no double standard, as people suspect, and often rightfully suspect. We've also had, I would say, unequal treatment in disciplinary process in schools toward minority children. You would think, man, it really takes a special, I'm going to censor myself, a special type of individual who would be racist toward children. But guess what? They've always been there, and chances are they'll be there for a while, even though they're supposed to be looking on the best interest of all children, regardless of their race, ethnicity, language, cultural background, or religious background. But it happens. So if you feel that your child or someone else's child that you know has been unfairly disciplined in a public or a private school, regardless whether this is elementary school, middle school, high school, or even institution of higher learning, colleges, universities, undergraduate, graduate programs, give me a call, let me know, or seek the advice of another attorney. Let's see whether we can get you some justice, because I believe that discrimination within the school system, especially during a child's formative years, even a teenager's formative years, is unacceptable. You can imagine, let's look at college, how much stress college students are under, especially considering how much college costs today. People want to do well. They understand that their chances of securing a good job or admission to graduate school will depend on their grades. Now imagine if all of a sudden they fall victim to discrimination from an assistant professor, or another teacher. Or if in your later years of high school and the same thing happens. The consequences can be devastating. So let's make sure that this does not happen. And if it does, it's addressed properly, people are held accountable, appropriate changes are made on an institutional level to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Regarding violation of constitutional and civil rights, this hurts for me to talk about as a police officer, but there's no way around it. Folks, let's face it. Unfortunately, we've had a number of incidents in law enforcement, not just American law enforcement, around the world, where law enforcement officers have been discriminatory in their treatment of suspects, of minority suspects. And not just suspects, but in their treatment of minority members of the population that they're interacting with. Even if these people are not suspects and are suspected of committing a crime. Usually you have encounters during pedestrian investigations where someone is stopped on the street. You have encounters during vehicular stops. Your car is stopped because the police suspect you violated some section of the motor vehicle code, speeding, red lights, inappropriate lane changes, whatever, you name it. And all of a sudden, you're starting to get a sense that the police are applying a double standard to you. If they have, well, talk to a lawyer. Maybe we can uncover a pattern like this in the police department. And some police departments have had a pattern of discriminatory conduct toward not even just minorities, but even people from other jurisdictions. We've all heard of these, local speed traps or other sources of revenue for a small police department. But that's not just it. You have large, big city police departments whose officers can also be very insensitive toward people because of their race, ethnicity, religious background, or whatever. Especially today, if we talk about an age of America after September 11th of 2001, there has been discrimination of Muslims. Many Muslims are unrightfully, inappropriately suspected of being terrorists or providing material aid, assistance to terrorists, without any reasonable or rational basis for such suspicions. I'm sure all of you have heard stories of people, being reported because they're speaking in Arabic in public transportation, whether it's a train, a bus, or a plane, because passengers all of a sudden are not comfortable with speakers of Arabic. Come on, this is ridiculous. Consider how many people in the world speak Arabic. You think all of them are terrorists? If you do, then well, you better get some sensitivity training and get a reality check. Sorry to be that blunt. We've also had cases of other types of xenophobia being expressed. Even Indian Sikhs have fallen victim to it because of the turbans that they wear. Other religious groups. Some people who are not even Arabic, they're mistaken for Arabs because of the way they dress, and Americans aren't even familiar with it. But getting back to the role of police in these encounters, obviously any police officer has a duty to act and investigate a report from the population, from the public. That's what we do. But when you embark on your investigation, you have to have the right mindset, the proper training, the right moral compass to understand that as a police officer, you should not be exacerbating a bad situation by trying to add some sort of official credence to a discriminatory or racist report, because that's just rubbing salt into a wound. So it's one thing if you're a member of a minority group or a group that's being discriminated against at some establishment. And that already hurts. But then when on top of it, police are summoned, and the police add insult to injury by being discriminatory and insensitive themselves, instead of trying to figure out what the full situation is by interviewing everyone while impartially, with sensitivity. If the police don't do that, and they simply act the same way as the people who've discriminated against you, that's just unacceptable, because it compromises a person's belief in this democratic theory that the state and its representatives are supposed to protect us. So, after all, that's why we form government. We expect the government to help us address societal issues and to protect us as citizens, as owners of property, as owners of businesses, as employees, even as students, or as motorists, or whatever else, or consumers of any service. We expect government protection. We expect the laws to be on the books that are supposed to protect us, our civil rights and our constitutional rights, to be applied fairly and evenly. And when someone in the private sector violates it and the police are summoned, we expect the police to be, well, basically fair arbiters at the scene, and not just to take one side, especially the side of someone who's perceived to be discriminatory. So that's about it. Anyway, if you're a consumer and you feel that your rights as a consumer have been violated, not just based on discrimination, the fundamentals of consumer protection laws are basically this. When a business violates your rights, for instance, by false advertising, or by making some misrepresentation of a material fact, when it comes to selling your product or a service, or failing to honor the terms of the sales contract, or applicable local laws, or warranty service, or exchange of merchandise that's found to be defective. If you feel you've been a victim of that, give us a call. In today's internet age, my office gets a lot of phone calls and even email inquiries from people who've fallen victims to basically, I call it internet fraud. They've tried to purchase items online through eBay, Craigslist, other types of internet sales platforms. I can't remember all of them that I've dealt with already. And all of a sudden, they don't get what they thought they were supposed to receive, or they don't receive anything at all. That's just outright theft of people's money. Or often, there have been cases where my clients have received stolen merchandise that, needless to say, they don't want, because who wants to be guilty of receiving or using stolen property? Many states, it's a crime. Receiving stolen property, or being in possession of it, or then passing it on to someone else. So if you're a victim of some sort of internet fraud or internet misrepresentation or false advertising, let us know. Same thing if it happens locally. If you're purchasing a service from a local provider or a product from a local store, and you feel that misrepresentations have been made to you, or the establishment is not fulfilling its terms of the sales or the service contract, or follow-up warranty service, please contact my law office, and we'll see whether we can help you out. When it comes to constitutional rights, well, it's a big issue, especially here in Washington, D.C. But your constitutional rights can be violated locally. I'm not talking about real serious heavy-duty rights like right to free speech or separation of church and state, and the right for you to practice your religion without any discrimination. I'm not talking about other serious rights, for instance, as Second Amendment rights. But even if those serious violations have taken place, often these violations aren't just done by representatives or employees of the state. Often these violations of constitutional rights could have been basically made by people in private business or in your community. If that's the case, then let us know, because, you know, I'm a big defender of constitutional rights, and if I see that someone's violating them, especially egregiously, then if I can help you out, I'll help you out. Civil rights, we've already talked about that. 2018, absolutely unacceptable to have your civil rights violated on the basis of your gender, your sexual orientation, your race, ethnicity, religious confession or form of worship, or any of the other criteria that have been traditionally applied to civil rights. If you're a victim or you've seen something happen and you want to report it, please contact my office or someone else. But in the meantime, folks, getting back to the episode at Starbucks, listen, if you go to an establishment, you know, many of us have done it. Remember, you know, these places aren't public bathrooms. Any establishment expects you to be a paying customer. They also expect you to be respectful of other customers. So when you go in somewhere, order something, you know, don't abuse your rights as a patron. We've all seen the guys who order something that costs $1 and then they'll sit there for 4 hours. And I'm thinking, man, especially if it's a crowded restaurant, you know, if everyone did that, the restaurant would just simply go out of business, because that's not the turnover that you need to stay solvent as a fast food or a restaurant or a coffee shop chain. So let's be respectful of that. But in the meantime, I implore anyone who works, owns, or manages a restaurant, fast food establishment, or a coffee shop, please be equally respectful of all consumers. Don't start making exceptions for people based on how they look, based on their ethnicity, race, as we said, you know, perceived socioeconomic status. Don't make double standards, and don't practice selective enforcement, where you're going to let, you know, someone said, look, we have some stereotypical blonde preppies sitting there and no one touches them. But if you start, someone comes in who looks like some quote unquote, you know, rough looking African-American or Hispanic, then people are looking at you and asking you to leave. That is unacceptable. Don't judge a book by its cover. And first and foremost, don't discriminate on the basis of race, sex, you know, ethnicity, or whatever else. Enjoy the fact that people bring you business and bring you their money, and have faith in your chain, or in your, even if it's just a single restaurant, that you're going to treat everyone equally and respectfully. That's about it. Thank you.